Teddy Bridgewater is back in the NFL. The Bucs bring him in on a one-year deal. I'll be honest, this feels like a win for all of us. How could you not be a fan of this guy? Katie Caldwell, Jeff Lloyd back here with you. Jeff, let's get into the Bucs QB room as we head into the preseason because the injuries are honestly starting to stack up and they haven't even taken a snap yet. So Baker Mayfield has been dealing with an injury to his hand. Michael Pratt is still battling a lower back injury. They still have Kyle Trask. Do you like the move to bring in Teddy as reassurance here?
I think it's an interesting move, and obviously, big props to whoever runs Florida high school football for forcing Teddy Bridgewater from doing everything that he was doing to have to go back to the NFL, I guess, which just seems strange. But you're seeing this a lot, in with whatever teams you're looking at, and this is the point now. We're 2 weeks in, and everybody's so geeked up, so ready to go. Then the pads go on, and all of a sudden, we get some crash test dummy. We start running into each other again, and
Yeah.
it's different in camp than it is. Like you play on Sunday, you basically don't really put pads even on again till maybe Thursday, and anything you're doing is very light. It's not really the case in training camp. There's a little more physicality to it.
Mhm.
There's a little more, live to it. So the dings and the bumps and the bruises, they certainly, they pick up quickly. And you want to make sure, in certainly a situation like Tampa Bay, there's no question that Baker Mayfield is their guy and is going to be their guy. But if you gotta, shut him down or take him out of a few drills or a few reps here in August, to get maximum return in September, it's 100% what you do. Um, I think I also like look, the Kyle Trask thing has really never worked out for them the way they were hoping to. I think Teddy at this point of his career is more than content of just kind of
Mhm.
being a guy that comes in and is, a backup quarterback, somebody that, people, on the roster certainly can rely to, and somebody that, just can blend in really, really well. And we think about this in the longevity that Teddy's actually had in the league, considering I guess it was probably a decade ago that devastating injury he suffered when he was still quarterbacking for the
Yeah.
Minnesota Vikings. So the fact that he's still able to go out, basically every year and do this, a little bit earlier than this year than when he jumped back into the league last year. But you want to talk about one of the league's all around good guys, and we've gotten to see
Mhm.
that that's pretty much the way Teddy Bridgewater handles himself in every aspect of his life. Certainly a good move for Tampa, and obviously Teddy, wherever he's at, football is still a major part of his life, and he just does not want to escape it in any way yet.
The Kyle Trask of it all is really interesting. Was this the best opportunity that he's had to prove that he can be a starting caliber quarterback in Tampa, especially with Baker Mayfield missing a few of these days? Did bringing in Teddy hurt that opportunity for him?
I think this one was kind of already kind of set. I mean, this team spent a second round pick on Kyle Trask. I mean, when you spend a second round pick
Yeah.
on a quarterback, obviously that shows that you have a pretty high belief of what he is capable of. It certainly, doesn't help Trask that, he's not gotten able to sniff the field the last 2 years just because of how well Baker Mayfield's played. And I'm
Right.
sure, Tampa Bay doesn't really care about the scenario now where they've gone to the playoffs a few years in a row and certainly led
Yeah.
by Baker. And, things seem to be just moving really well in that situation. Kyle Trask, in my opinion, probably could very easily be a guy that maybe doesn't make this 53. Pratt has not been
Mhm.
there as long. You don't ask Teddy to come in and all of this, without telling, say, look, there's a, you don't tell Teddy Bridgewater, I'll come in and we'll see where we're at in 2 weeks. I mean, if I'm sure the dialogue was, hey, if you want to come in, we got a spot for you, all
Mhm.
season long. That's fine, no problem. So now it seems like you have the dynamic where it's Pratt probably, competing against Kyle Trask. And, for Trask, it's just, it's never gone that well. Again, he didn't draft himself. He was certainly overdrafted, but again, he didn't draft himself. Tampa Bay had a lot of faith that there was going to be more development, a little more refinement to the game. That's just unfortunately just never really came for Kyle Trask. Probably signal the Bridgewater move probably signals the end for Kyle Trask, which I mean, you never know. There could be a situation where maybe Tampa would like to have a quarterback on the practice squad. Certainly somebody that knows the system very well. All things that could work in that way. But Teddy Bridgewater, by signing this deal and agreeing to this deal, I'm sure Teddy knew that there was a commitment that this was going to be a full year long thing for him,
Mhm.
going to Tampa. And you know, Baker, Teddy, it's not the worst thing in the world sometimes to have a guy who's kind of on like your same level that you can go sit down, look at the iPad real quick, or somebody that's just going to say something that maybe you missed. Certainly, some veteran presence there. Pratt nor Trask were never really going to be a backup that maybe Baker could kind of lead on. And I know when
Mhm.
Baker was in Cleveland years ago, he had a really good relationship with Cody Kessler, kind of a similar type of thing, was just somebody at that point, Kessler was older, but, having somebody, it's not always easy when you're the veteran quarterback. You want to have somebody that you feel is on your level. And obviously for Pratt and Trask, neither one of them have really had much time in the NFL. So it's not like Baker could maybe kind of lean on those guys in a situation, but a guy like Teddy certainly brings that, calming influence that, any teammate would want in a situation.
Calming influence and just a great overall vibe. I just love Teddy Bridgewater so much. What's the long-term development plan for Pratt here? This feels like a bit of a nightmare situation with a lingering back injury, or is this something we're not super worried about?
That is certainly, this is a big cause of concern, no question. I mean, and I think, if anything, you look at a team like the Los Angeles Rams and you look where Matthew Stafford is right now, and, you realize how essential healthy quarterback play is.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to affect Tampa Bay overall as much. It's certainly not a really great situation for Pratt. Baker is now entrenched there for a while with a big long
Mhm.
deal. You brought in Teddy here, who even if Pratt is completely healthy, I would still think Pratt is competing for the quarterback 3 job. Teddy Bridgewater. It's been a lot of stops along the way during his time in the NFL, but Teddy's certainly shown he can go out there and contribute and obviously contribute pretty well. And I think that it was one of the reasons why, Tampa went this route as opposed to maybe just finding, a just another guy, some other quarterback that's kind of been bouncing around here. It seems, they wanted to have a little more stability behind Baker Mayfield because it's not just the injuries, of course. It's just the fact that neither one of them has much playing time besides Baker Mayfield. And if there gets a situation, where, God forbid you lose Baker for a week or two, you're going to
Mhm.
need somebody to keep the ship going down and, the ship going down the water. And obviously Teddy Bridgewater is more than capable of doing that. Good teams have to make tough decisions sometimes. And, I think Tampa's in a situation here now where, you need to have a little bit more in the quarterback room because Baker has played so well for you that if there's any chance you lose him, what you have in either Trask or Pratt is, a significant, significant downgrade. I think they feel like they upgrade pretty heavily by bringing in Teddy Bridgewater.
Mhm. I agree. Are we worried at all about Baker's injury?
I don't think so. I mean, part of Baker's thing is Baker's a football player, and
Yeah.
sometimes, and this is what obviously led to the whole downward spiral in Cleveland. He threw an interception, and there he was between the hash marks, as opposed to doing what most quarterbacks are told to do and just get the heck out of the way. Baker went, made the tackle, tore his labrum in the process,
Mhm.
and basically his left shoulder was flying out of the socket. 2, 3 times a game. He was too stubborn to basically tell the team that, he was hurt enough that he shouldn't be playing. So basically his relationship with the team kind of soured, his relationship with the fan base soured. I'm sure Cleveland would give anything for that to have not gone the way it did. Um, but Baker's not going to change, and I think that's the thing. And you see, I've seen certainly, in his maturation, came into the league, got married, very young in his career. Now he's a father. You just see a little bit different side of Baker. But that part of Baker when he's on the field between the white lines has never changed. He still thinks
Mhm.
he's the toughest kid in the schoolyard. It certainly does, not always equate to the best success for Baker. Always been a chippy guy, a vocal guy on the field, and that maybe leads to maybe an altercation or two that maybe you usually don't want your quarterbacks to get into. But it's that same drive and it's that same fire that has gotten Baker to the success levels that he's at in the NFL or gotten to in the NFL.
Mhm.
So basically, by kind of like, neutering that out of him, you might be taking away the overall effectiveness of, a player that he has. And you look at the way it all fell apart in Cleveland, and then it was the Carolina and the Rams thing, and played the game without about 24 hours notice. And then, Tampa, basically took on a chance on a guy who was a little bit, broken down on the side of the road, mentally, as far as his game, there was some confidence, questions as well. His time in Cleveland, he basically found out his father and his brother were robbing him blind. So, I mean, at the time where it was relationship with his teammates, the team that drafted him, the city that he thought was home, was all kind of falling apart. He was
Mhm.
also dealing with the fact that his legitimate family was, certainly having some serious issues and falling apart as well. He's really become one of the better stories, I think, in the league. just, got to Tampa and basically just, did anything that was asked of him. The success came and, put together a second year. Now, obviously, played pretty handsomely. Baker Mayfield's one of the, one of the better stories as when you watch where it went from the beginning. So then obviously really down low. And then obviously these last 2 years with Tampa, so it's really been a nice ride for Baker Mayfield. Baker's always going to go out there, stubborn probably to a
Yeah.
fault, and I don't know that necessarily this injury is anything that's going to hold him back in September. And maybe one of the things, Baker will learn through, being more established in this league and more mature is, hey, it's okay to say that you can't do everything. You're not Baker Mayfield, the 22, 23-year-old anymore. Nobody's taking your job. So,
Yeah.
veteran days off kind of exists for a reason.
He really does just have one of the more interesting character arcs in the NFL. I have said it before, I can't believe that I'm excited to watch Baker Mayfield play football yet again. I couldn't imagine myself saying that 3 years ago, but here we are. We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the quarterback room for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Are you excited about them bringing in Teddy Bridgewater? And how do they deal with all of this, with all of these guys in that room? Let us know in the comments below.